Affordable housing? No profit. Are you wondering why your rent has gone up needlessly?
Rents have been skyrocketing across the country. Could this be the reason why?
You may want to take a look at this ProPublica investigation. Crooked landlords are now using a piece of software known as YieldStar. This evil algorithm is causing landlords to raise rents needlessly in all parts of the nation. The tenant cannot negotiate with the landlord because this algorithm, made by a company known as RealPage, is designed to squeeze whatever is left from those who don't have money. Greystar, the largest property management firm in the nation, has boasted about how YieldStar has allowed them to outperform their forecasts by 4.8%, and RealPage is encouraging property managers and landlords to keep units vacant. Now, the landlord can, of course, reject YieldPage's results, but 90% of them are accepted. So essentially, this is greed run on autopilot. And we're going to see technology increasingly used to screw over everyone in the years to come.
So this TikTok by Edward Champion outlines research done by ProPublica that outlines software that a bunch of landlords across the United States are using. Now, to be clear, the landlords insist that this software isn't collusion and it's not responsible for the skyrocketing rents. But what exactly does this software do? You see, it takes a bunch of data from a bunch of different landlords and compiles it, and then it churns out this little algorithm. This little algorithm churns out a number that tells them how that they should price their individual units. It calculates a ton of different factors, and while all of these different companies don't share data directly with each other, because they all share their data with this third party, and this third party is the one churning out the algorithm, it really seems like there'd be a pretty solid case to say that this is some sort of collusion or price fixing scheme, especially when you consider the fact that if you look at the areas where this algorithm is being used the most, they are also some of the areas that have the highest rate of increase in rents. In fact, some people that are tenants in buildings where this software is being used, tenants are seeing rate increases of upwards of 30%. And even more shocking in this is the revelation that this company is actually encouraging landlords in some instances to accept higher vacancy rates in tandem with their higher rents and are still churning out higher profits. And now think about this. This is something that all of the traditional economists have been telling us couldn't possibly be the case. That all of the people that talk about empty housing and how empty units are leading to an artificial shortening of supply and thus an artificial increase in price are just these nonsensical conspiracy theorists, these left-wingers who don't know how the economy really works. When this company with this algorithm that works with so many landlords is actively encouraging them to accept higher vacancy rates, which really means is that they are artificially keeping the supply of housing low. They are letting more units sit empty. And now you can say that, oh, well, it's really only a shift of like 3 to 5% in vacancy rates. But that 3 to 5% is absolutely huge, because if you're talking about literally millions of apartments, even if it's just 1 million apartments, the difference between a 98% and a 95% vacancy rate is literally the difference of thousands of empty units. And we are obviously in a situation now where there are far more empty units than there are homeless people. And the reality is that if vacancy rates were lower, that rents themselves would also be lower, which is something that landlords admit that one of the things that this software is meant to help compete with is to help manage more effectively the supply and demand of units to keep profits high. Something which, mind you, they say, according to competitive market forces, shouldn't be a thing that is happening. And yet here it is, happening before our eyes. And in reference to whether or not this algorithm is collusion, the article actually took a quote from Maureen Olhausen, who suggested using a guy named Bob as a replacement for the term algorithm to get people a sense of what this really means. And she was quoted as saying, quote, "Is it okay for a guy named Bob to collect confidential price strategy information from all the participants in a market and tell them everybody how they should price? If it isn't okay for a guy named Bob to do it, then it probably isn't okay for an algorithm to do it either." And so, realistically, there are three main takeaways from this that I think are absolutely critical. First and foremost is that the reality of competition under capitalism isn't really the truth, because capitalists recognize that by cooperating with each other, whether it be indirectly or directly, they can actually extract much higher profits, especially with inelastic goods like housing. You will pay for housing even if you really can't afford it, because the only other alternative is to be homeless. And so the myth of innovation and prices going down under capitalism is just exactly that. It is purely a myth. Because the material reality is capitalists recognize that by investing in each other's companies and by sharing information with each other indirectly or directly, they can actually game the system and manage supply and demand effectively across the market as a whole, so that instead of competing with each other, it is simply capitalists competing with workers. The other takeaway from this is the reality of the use of algorithms to abdicate responsibility. You see, capitalists love complicated, nonsensical bureaucracy because it allows them to pretend like they're not individually culpable even for things that they're profiting off of. And in this case, there were regular workers that worked at property management companies that were like, well, I don't know if we should really raise the rent here, because this is happening or this is happening, or I don't know if people would tolerate a 30% increase in their rent over just the span of a couple months. But when you have an algorithm do it, then people will go, well, I guess the algorithm says to do it. Even though these property management companies can actually just set the prices themselves, they leave it to this algorithm so that instead of taking the personal responsibility that capitalists love to say they take, they just blame it on this algorithm and say, well, it's what the market says it is, and so, it's no big deal. It's really not up to me. And it's just another way that capitalists invent these artificial systems so that they can abdicate responsibility and pretend that they're not really responsible for the systems that they themselves profit off of. And the third main takeaway is the reality that fundamentally landlords will not shy away from intentionally leaving units vacant just for the sole purpose of making more of a profit.